Identity has been a bit of a problem for InfoSec since I got in.
I think you only have to look at what's happening around the world in terms of incidents taking place to say that probably we haven't cracked it.
If somebody gets into that database, that's it. Identity theft is going to be inevitable at that point.
Attackers aren't breaking in anymore. They're logging in, right?
I definitely see passwords going the way of the dodo.
Organizations are realizing that passwordless is not just a bingo word anymore. It is something that we need to get into and provide.
Biometrics followed by AI levels of authentication where it looks at you, your mannerisms, and it evaluates whether you actually are who you say you are.
Let's not just put security controls on top of what is probably a risky situation.
Why do I have to authenticate 8 times to get into different products?
For personal reasons, for apps, etc., we want it to be very easy. And if it's not, we usually abandon it. That behavior of the consumers is trickling into the enterprise.
Every time we kind of get to a point where we feel we're getting somewhere with it, someone introduces some new technology that just kind of throws us back again.
From a mindset perspective, that there is technology out there that can help in making things easier, better, faster. Again, we're humans and change is not very easy.
We fear change. Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now today, we are going to be going back to one of the core tenets of security. Authentication, identity management, systems administrative accounts, how to handle them, why is it important, what do we do about it, what's the modern trends, what are the historical trends. We're going to be covering all of these things in this fantastic episode of Razorwire. And I have 2 new guests who can sit and discuss these very important matters with us and to tell us a little bit more about where we are, where we're going, what the problems are. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. And today, for the Razorwire topic, is very topical for this current day and age where everybody is concerned around the security of access control and identity. And, we've got various different countries, my own included, bringing in their own forms of digital validation as well as kind of digital cards and digital IDs and stuff like that. But it's been a concern for the industry for quite a while on how we handle that kind of authentication, identity, and that kind of stuff. And I have got 2 fantastic individuals with me today to discuss this important topic that vexes all of us InfoSec people. So who shall I start with? David, do you want to kind of introduce yourself?
I'm trying my best. Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. So, hi, everyone. David Higgins, Field CTO at CyberArk. Been with the company for 15 years and spent 5+ more years in the same space of identity. Looking at all the fun challenges that no doubt we're going to try and unpick today around the complexities of securing identity, enabling the right users, get the right access, and of course, the reason why it's so topical and targeted. And looking forward to today's discussion.
I have my second guest, Murtaza. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone. Murtaza Hafizji. I've been in the cybersecurity identity space for coming up to about 15 years. Got my start at RSA, and currently I'm at OneSpan on the product marketing side, but been in identity, authentication, and access for quite some time. So looking forward to this discussion.
Fantastic. So let's set the scene, shall we? Identity. Identity has been a bit of a problem for InfoSec since I got in. And I did think about this the other day. I've been in this game now for nearly 30 years. It'll be 30 years next year.
Wow.
God, am I feeling it. But, we've always had this kind of love-hate relationship with identity, haven't we? Let's be honest. You've got the aspect of, authentication and validation of the levels of authority that you have from the technical sense. You've got the non-repudiation of the actual person using the account, which we all know and love, splitting your admin accounts, for instance, from your standard accounts, which still can be a bit of a problem in today's age, especially from people like CEOs who may have a bit of a technical knowledge wanting permanent admin rights to everything. And we all know how that goes. And then we all always have that kind of big tension that kind of sits between security and the users about the best way to do it. We've gone through that whole username password phase. Obviously, that's not enough anymore. We're now on MFA. We've gone through various different kind of iterations of MFA. I remember the early biometrics, for instance, which was a scanner that you plugged into your USB key and you could screw it over with a gummy bear, of all things, that you put on your finger. Obviously, now they're a lot more advanced, but we've gone through a number of iterations. I mean, let's start this off. Do you think we've kind of cracked it today in today's age compared to where we were, say, 15, 20, maybe even 30 years ago? Or do you still think it's a big problem or a big issue for users, for admins, and for the InfoSec and business community at large?
I think you only have to look at what's happening around the world in terms of incidents taking place to say that probably we haven't cracked it. I think, and look, that's not to say that we haven't solved the historic problems that you kind of referred to. I think we have. It's just, like everything in security, as we do one thing, as we start using MFA as being the de facto, attackers look for ways and means to circumvent. What I think has probably changed a little bit in identity, into your question about have we cracked it, is I think identity kind of set on two worlds, really. It was kind of like its predominant focus initially was more about enablement, right? As a new employee joins the organization, the priority is going to be, can they access the resources? Can they log in? Can they start working? And it's kind of, identity was kind of focused more enabling the business. And I think over the past 10, 15 years, we've seen that actually identity is also about securing the business, because that ingress point is a compromised identity, it's a stolen credential, it's a compromised MFA, etc. So what I think started to happen is those two things are coming together, and that's part of the challenge. You alluded to that right earlier, which is making sure that we're securing but allowing users to do what we do, and the conflict between users. Have we cracked that? No. Are we improving? Absolutely, for sure. But I think the other compromise complexity, if I use my right words, is the technology landscape keeps changing. So yeah, we fix one problem, but then we add more by the technology environment shifting, whether that be automation, cloud, or of course I'll be the first one to say, I don't know how far we are in, but I'll be the first one to say AI, right? But it's out there now. I've said it.
There's some people out there with a bingo card at the moment ticking that one off.
Yeah, we'll have to say zero trust as well in a second. So then we'll
There we go, another one.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so I think it's a constant challenge, and part of that is, as I say, the landscape keeps changing as well.
Yeah, I agree on the landscape, right? I mean, I think being in the industry and kind of seeing that evolution of passwords and then MFA and now it's like what's next. But I think the challenge that I see is in the past, the users were given one option of here is what you can use to authenticate into something. I think, but as I feel as technology has advanced, and more so on the consumer side, right? We as users, how much do we, when we're logging in or signing in into applications, for personal reasons, for apps, etc., we want it to be very easy. And if it's not, we usually abandon it. We go out, or we close the window out, or we do something else and we go to a different app. So I think that nature or that behavior of the consumers is now is trickling into the enterprise, right? And I think that demand of it needs to be easy for me to do my job is something that's very critical. And I think that's where some of the struggle is. And I think the technology is there, the user acceptance of using different methods or using the secure way to sign in is there. It's just a matter of how do you match that with the, as David said, right, the technology evolution within the enterprise, and kind of bringing all that together will certainly help. So I think we have cracked it in a way where in separate parts we might have. But again, when you combine it all into one, that's where I feel some of the challenges exist currently.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I got into kind of the IT aspects of information security, as I mentioned earlier on, now quite a long time ago. And I have seen that evolution from where access accounts, or accounts that we were utilizing were either very badly used back in the day because we didn't have the granularity that we have now to be able to kind of differentiate roles within an environment. I mean, I come from an MT4 time. It was very Wild West back then. If you had admin, you had admin. I think the only other type of admin you had was local admin. But there was there was ways you could make it granular, but it's nowhere near as, the technologies are much, much better these days. Dare I say it, with the various different iterations of operating systems as they've gone on. They have done a good job of being able to kind of more granularly control things. But I think we were just getting used to it. And then, of course, cloud came in. So then it was a case, well, how does all of this work together if like half of our systems are in the cloud, half of our systems are still in data centers? How do they interact? And, dare I say it, Active Directory at the beginning of that wasn't the greatest at kind of dealing with it. So we had to kind of build that technology out. And as David mentioned, I'm now ticking a bit of a buzzword bingo box myself. With AI, obviously, it's getting more and more critical to be able to prove the identity of that individual and the actions that they're taking. Because again, 20, 30 years ago, monitoring was very, very light. It was a collection of event logs. And if you were lucky, the application that you had some form of access log or some form of logs as well. So you could see when people were trying to log in or individuals had possibly stolen an account. Nowadays, it's much, much simpler, and we've kind of come together a lot more. But now we've thrown in that whole zero trust thing. Again, every time we kind of get to a point where we feel we're getting somewhere with it, someone introduces some new technology that just kind of throws us back again, because it wasn't that long ago that 8-character passwords, complex, that kind of thing, that was the norm, that was standard. But now if you look at, like, say, PCI DSS framework, the complexity of passwords have definitely increased exponentially to the point where even the most hardened and diehard kind of security person finds it difficult to remember their passwords, let alone changing their passwords as regularly as they need to. So we've got this whole kind of, how do we still make access control and identity management functional, and as both of you have said, easy as well? Because okay, I'm going to say it. 20 years ago, there was a lot of very not tech-savvy users who really didn't know and didn't get to grips with systems. But then, that was at a time of flip phones, and texting was very, very difficult. But, we're in a different world now. What are you guys, what are your individual companies seeing in your trends? Because obviously you do a lot of investigation into the current trends, and you speak to a lot of different customers in your spaces, because you're both in slightly different spaces, but of the same flip side of the coin. What's the research seeing from your side of the fence? Where are we now? And then we'll hit where we're going afterwards, which might be a little bit more of a complex thing.
Yeah. As you say, right, we're both in identity, but different areas. And it's that thing that identity is actually quite a broad topic. I think often, people think identity and it's a niche area within security, but actually within itself, many different kind of subdomains that we need to consider. But yeah, I'd say probably 3 areas of, I guess, trends. One you touched on before, right? There's always been, it doesn't matter which government agency you go to, the best practice has always been the principle of least privilege, right? We should give users just the permission that they need for the period of time that they need it, and no longer, right? And no more. The challenge historically is operating systems were very granular, so it was either basic user or full admin, not much in the middle to actually doing principle of least privilege, which is difficult. It's actually completely reversed now in today's world, where you go and sign up to one of the cloud providers, AWS, Azure, GCP as an example, and now you're talking about tens of thousands of different entitlements and roles that you can give someone. So actually, we've gone from zero granularity to actually arguably too much granularity, and trying to now work out what users need in advance in what is a highly dynamic environment is a real challenge. It's like it's almost impossible. So in the early days, we just made everyone admin because then they could do what they want. And now in cloud environments, we're giving everyone full admin because it's too difficult to work out the granularity and what they need in advance. So where we're kind of going with this is a change in approach, especially when thinking about kind of infrastructure folk and developers, to say, well, let's not pre-plan permissions up front. Right? Let's grant them on the fly and move towards a position of more zero standing privilege. No one has any privileges. No one has any permissions until we need them. We grant them on the fly and we revoke them afterwards, which aligns very nicely to the more granular environments like cloud. So that's kind of trend number one, is more moving away from standing privileges because it's too difficult to be granular. And also, if we have all these accounts with far too many permissions, that's exactly why we see attackers go after them, because of the rights that they give and the facilitation that they give around lateral movement. Trend number two is a third party, fourth party, fifth party, however long down you want to go down that chain, right? And their identity problems and access that they have, which is, again, I think a topic we could unpick for hours. And then the third one is the non-human side. It's through automation, through, like I'll mention it again, AI, we're giving identities and access and entitlements to non-humans, and they need to perform certain functions, and that volume of identities is expanding. So that's a real trend and challenge for organizations.
Yeah, I think from my side of the house, specifically being in authentication, it's been all about passwordless, right? Oh, there we go. That's your bingo word.
There you go. We're doing well.
So the passwordless evolution, right? Again, we were passwords, then we came to one-time passwords or OTPs, and now we're moving towards passwordless. And then the latest Gartner hype cycle, the digital identity report that came out, passwordless and using passkeys is not something that is on the kind of the new technology. It is main technology now, and it's about how organizations and companies roll it out at scale. I think that's where one of the things that we're seeing is organizations realize that using passwordless or having that option for your users is critical for productivity and for keeping your users happy. But how do you actually scale it where it's, and not just hundreds of thousands of users, it could be millions of users for certain organizations. And there's that fork or bifurcation of workforce identity and authentication, as well as consumer authentication, where in consumer space, again, there's millions of users versus maybe thousands in the workforce. So how do you also bring those two, if there is a way to do that under one, and provide those, cater to both of those groups within a unified platform or a vendor, et cetera? From our side, what we're seeing is that organizations are realizing that passwordless is not just a bingo word anymore. It is something that we need to get into and provide, but how do we do it at scale where it doesn't take a year to implement or for users to accept? And it's easy. Again, I keep going back to that from a UX perspective to make sure that the adoption is there. Because again, if there is no adoption, people don't use it. We've known this, shadow IT, and people will find a way around it. So that's where I think what we're seing at OneSpan.
It's an interesting one as well there, because that passwordless challenge isn't just a scalability too. Sometimes you're handcuffed by third-party applications that may just simply not support modern authentication. So, as you say, it's an objective, but actually sometimes you're kind of technology constrained as well. Sometimes.
Right.
I mean, the whole passwordless thing. I mean, it's funny actually, because I got introduced to biometrics quite early, and it was the be all and end all, but the technology we had back then was horrendous. It authenticated when it should have authenticated. It didn't authenticate if it was too sensitive. If you sliced your finger open, that was it. It was kind of a nightmare. But we're starting to sort of see a big resurgence of that for a little while now. We've obviously gotten very used to opening our phones now with either our face or our thumb. And I think that, we're seeing a big resurgence. I definitely see passwords going the way of the dodo. We still have them. But let's face it, most people at the moment, and a lot of organizations that we deal with, have password vaults now that sort of build the passwords for them, manage the passwords for them. And then the second factor is normally, the authenticator on the phone or some form of authenticator. I mean, I remember a day, again, I'm showing my age now, where you used to have like a device on your keys, a token that just gave you randomly generated, or algorithmically generated numbers that you would use. And of course, that's now digitized and on phones. It's really interesting to see how the cycle of identity and authentication seems to go in this endless circle. It's not fad to fad, but it's like, it's interesting because I thought biometrics was a great idea, but I honestly saw it die off for ages. Nobody wanted it. The early day stuff was pretty bad, let's be honest. But now it seems to be the de facto way of going passwordless.
Yeah, and I think, we've touched on it already, which is the technology's getting better. Is part of it, and it's becoming more accessible at a larger scale. Before, it needed very expensive devices, physical devices, which you mentioned. Now I can use biometric authentication onto my smartphone. Multiple apps now supporting passkeys. Very much with you that ideally passwords are disappearing. It's a security concept that was introduced in the 1960s, and yet we still rely upon it today. But it's one of the most exploited forms of authentication. Absolutely, it's moving away. The truth is, I think, as you mentioned, we're always still going to have some. I think it's a case that they're never going to 100% disappear, but they should become the exception, not the norm. The world of passwordless, ironically, is built on a world of passwords because all the underlying infrastructure, unless Microsoft, Red Hat, etc., start fundamentally changing the way that they build their operating systems, you're always going to have these built-in accounts that the first thing we have to do is set some kind of credential. After that, I agree, right? We should be stepping into a world where our users don't need to be remembering passwords because that's where the challenges come. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it was always the right idea. It's just now it's become accessible. It's almost you could kind of say the same thing a little bit with, I know we've talked about it already, but AI and ChatGPT, right? It's not a new concept. It's been around for a while. But now it's accessible. Now it's providing value to a much broader user base, and I think that's the same with biometric.
Yeah, and I would say that I think it's also about embracing technology, right? Mm-hmm. I think when the pandemic hit and during COVID, like I had somebody who said to me, for my kids, that the kids who were growing up during the pandemic are actually growing up in a different day and age versus where we grew up. They're actually growing up with technology. So you cannot, and I know this is a bit off topic, but it's like you cannot try to keep limiting or restricting and saying, well, you can't use this device, you can't use that device to the kids, because that's how they have grown up. Going to school was online. Communicating to friends was doing FaceTime because you couldn't meet in person. So I think similarly on the enterprise side, there has to be a mind shift of technology is there. We have to embrace the technology to make it easy for our users to continue to work and be more productive. I think a lot of times the challenge between maybe the IT security teams is that we have a certain way of doing things, and this is how it has to be done, and nothing else fits in it, even though it might. But no, this is our way of thinking, and this is how we're going to do it. So I think part of it is a bit of a mind shift on accepting what's out there and how it can help versus just saying, nope, it's not secure. Because, Jim, you brought up biometrics. When we started to use biometrics, the first was we don't think this is safe. We don't know where this is getting stored. I don't want my retina scan to be somewhere that somebody can see it. Those were some of the questions, right? But now, as you said, it's so easy. I was just watching a FIDO webinar yesterday about using passwordless in the automotive industry. And you're in your car and you're using a passkey to authenticate into your infotainment system or the seating and the weather of your car. So the technology is there. It's just how open are you to adapt it and embrace it within your organization to make it easy. And not just make it easy, but make it get your organization to a level where it's like you are the modern company that is embracing these things to make it be more competitive in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, both of you have touched on some interesting sort of psychological elements there, and I mean, one of the big challenges is you've got two extreme sides of the fence. You have the old timers who find it difficult to embrace the new technology because they're not used to it. It's just very alien to them. And at the rate of technological change we've experienced in the last 20 years alone, it's mind-boggling. You've got that on one side of the fence. And as you quite rightly pointed out, you've got the other side of the fence where you've got kids who are growing up with it intrinsically kind of like woven into their daily life. I mean, my kids, one's 6 years old and the other one's 9. They're far more savvy with technology than I ever was. But then, admittedly, when I was their age, I was playing on my ZX Spectrum. I mean, there wasn't really anything to secure. But, they quite happily navigate themselves around, computers and tellies and all the rest of it, and tablets in ways that I didn't until I was much, much older. And they embrace the new kind of authentication methods just like that because they're used to doing it. We are moving to a point where passwords are going out the window. I reckon there's still going to be two-factor authentication, but I think what will happen is it will be something like biometrics followed by AI kind of levels of authentication where it looks at you, your mannerisms, and it evaluates whether you actually are who you say you are in an ongoing fashion, not just kind of when you log in, which is the traditional and still is the kind of the way that the world works. Okay, we've got monitoring, we've got various different ways of monitoring, but I think that's probably going to be the most important. But the other thing that you pointed out was the privacy element. Now, this is the bit that everybody has a problem with. I mentioned at the beginning, in the UK, we're going through this whole think of the children looking at things they shouldn't be looking at online. Well, who defines that? But that's fine. We'll just put on sort of verification, which means we'll look at your face, which means we'll take a copy of your driving license or whatever. There's lots of different discussions about how this is going to be done. And this is all going to be held, as I pointed out on LinkedIn, on a governmental database or some kind of database accessible by the government and pretty much everybody else at the lowest cost possible, because that's the way the government works. And when the lowest cost possible comes in, the lowest levels of security don't even get adopted in. So I think we've got this kind of real challenge ahead of us. We have to update, we have to move to different forms of MFA for non-repudiation, move away from just kind of your login and dare I say it, that kind of single login thing to more continuous kind of level of verification. One of my former employers, who will remain nameless, used to like sharing accounts. We've got somebody coming in for the day to do something. They're only in for the day. It's going to take us 2 weeks to get an account from IT, and it probably won't have the rights that it needs. And I don't understand the form that I've got to fill in. So I'm just going to log them in as me and then just let them get on with it, which has introduced all kinds of challenges for security people. Now we don't need to do that. But I do think that, there's this real concern around, well, who's storing this data? How is it secured? Is it secured in the right way? Because if somebody gets into that database, and you see this with a lot of commentators, especially kind of political commentators at the moment with the BRIC card or whatever the hell it's going to be called, If somebody gets hold of that information, that's it. Identity theft is going to be inevitable at that point. What are your thoughts? I mean, where do you think this is going? What am I talking complete toffee, or am I, hitting the mark? I mean, looking at it from my side of the fence, I see the user kind of frustrations around it. Why do I have to authenticate 8 times to get into different products? I've got my SaaS product, I've got this, that, and the other. I want one authentication. But then on the other side of the fence, you've got security people saying, well, we can't just authenticate once. We've got to, especially if you're getting into very sensitive areas, how do we make it easy? And this is where we circle back to the beginning of this conversation, while still having effective security. What are your thoughts on where we need to go, or what maybe you've seen the future?
So I think I'll maybe rewind, let's say 7 years or so, when authentication was paired with risk-based authentication, right? There was this concept of, okay, if there are some anomalies detected on your normal behavior, we will step up authentication, for example, and ask you to verify with something else or something we feel it's stronger than what you're using. And I think at that time, it wasn't, at least from my experience, it wasn't something that really picked up. It was a good concept. It was a good idea. But I think coming now to current times, I think that is something that we're seeing is getting back into the conversation, because of, as we are embracing more technologies, as we're trying to make it easy for our users, as we are bringing on more users, onboarding different kind of workers, part-time employees, gig workers, etc. I think there has to be a way to address that, and I think that is something that we're seeing that organizations are a bit more open to. Security convenience, that tug of war is going to always be there, but I think how do we make sure that both are happy is something that, again, will evolve as we go. But I see the risk-based authentication piece gaining momentum, again, trying to address some of the points that you just discussed when it comes to accessing something that's might be a little bit more, secretive, or something that's not something that a person normally does.
Yeah, and you only have to look to kind of back up that point. You only have to look at some of the big breaches happening in the UK just this year, right? They started with, hey, look, well, attacks are commoditized now. I don't need to do that initial intrusion. I go to the dark net, I'll purchase some ready stolen credentials. Perfect, I've got a username and password. Now I'm going to hit the help desk and get them to reset the MFA token for that particular individual. Now I've owned their identity. So concepts and continuous authentication has got to be brought into it. It's not just, hey, is this device normal? Have we done the Superman check, right? As the IP address they logged in before, 5 minutes later they're now logging in from New York. Because IP spoofing, that's not a big complex thing to kind of to circumnavigate anymore. I think it's also got to be those behavioral patterns. Because when you play out some of those attacks, okay, we have an identity completely owned. But can they impersonate the way that user typically interacts with resources and what they do and the data they access? That's a lot more complex to do. And I think that's where the continuous auth has to kind of come into it, so that we can say, well, actually, everything that presented up front looks good, but everything that happened afterwards, well, that's standing out, and we need to react to that. I'm not saying it's the silver bullet, but I think, we have to be mindful that, attackers they know the way to get in it's easy. Just take an identity and own it, and then you're stepping through the front door. And it's that cliche expression I've heard security leaders say it. So it's not a cybersecurity vendor saying it. It's attackers aren't breaking in anymore; they're logging in, right? So that continuous auth piece is going to be hugely important.
I think it's interesting the direction that I see the way I think it's going to go. I think it's going to wind up being that the second factor being that continuous AI review of what it is you're doing and assessing what you're trying to do as well, especially if you're an admin or something like that, because it is really difficult. If you are an admin and you're sitting there reading your emails and you think, oh, bugger, I've got to log on to that server. So you go to log on to the server, which means you've got to have another set of credentials you've got to do, another set of authentication. Sometimes if you want to, for instance, on my own personal machine at home, I have my standard account and I have my admin account. And it is really annoying when I want to update something or if I want to get something done. I have to continuously log in, sometimes 2 or 3 times, because there's 2 or 3 sessions being started and 2 or 3 the parts of the update that are being done. Like graphics drivers, for instance, are really, really bad with that one. Personally, I think what will happen is, I mean, we have to go passwordless anyway. We can't do that anymore. As I said, people are using password vaults now. We've had PAM for a while, good example, privileged access management, and that's always been a bit. It's good, but I always felt that it was never quite there. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I better take that one right. Having been doing PAM for quite some time.
Don't want to put anybody on the spot here.
No pressure. So the way I kind of see privileged access over the years is it almost started as, well, let's solve the problem that is there right now. Let's not solve the root cause of the problem. And so what I mean by that is what happened is exactly to your point, we started giving users lots of permissions. We gave admins all the rights that they needed. Sometimes we often said, you know what, you don't need to change the password for your secondary account because we know that's a pain and you're really important because you're keeping the business rolling. And PAM kind of came in and said, we've got all these excessive permissions, we've got all these accounts, we've got problems around accountability. How do we solve it? Well, let's put some governance and control around the credential. And that's where password vaulting came into the mix and rotating of credentials. And that's always going to be something we still need to do, as I say, because root's always going to be there, administrator's always going to be there, glass accounts are always going to be there. And where PAM is today, and it links to what I was saying before, is, well, actually, let's not just put security controls on top of what is probably a risky situation. Let's unpick all those excessive permissions, too many standing accounts, right? The classic model, as you mentioned, I've got a secondary account. I go away on holiday for 2 weeks. That secondary account sitting there, it's got full admin across an entire estate. You know, that's not an ideal scenario. That account shouldn't have admin rights when it's not being used. And so privileged access is evolving with the technology to say, well, let's not just put controls around a password now. Let's actually say, we're going to give you the permissions as you need them, just for when you need them, and revoke it afterwards, and all that's going to be tracked and monitored. And again, the technology is enabling us to do that because cloud is very API driven, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I personally see privileged access needs to be moving towards a position of zero standing privileges, as opposed to putting, I guess, a sticky plaster over what is a risky posture from an identity point of view.
Yeah, and I hope it does get better as well, because, I mean, let's face it, I mean, PAM has been a bit problematic. You know, it's you have to tune it so carefully, because sometimes you can get into a situation where you need access to something and it's just not giving you access. You're like, look, dude, I'm trying to get my job done, you know. And I think that the inclusion of AI techniques and machine learning, I mean, I remember going to InfoSec many, many years ago, and there was a company there that did signature-based authentication. So it wasn't just you had your username and your password. This was before MFA, or MFA became such a thing. And it was the way that you typed your password as well.
Yeah.
You know, which was really interesting. But I don't think it was the right technology, because if you busted your fingers, you're kind of nuts. You know, it was like with biometrics, you slice your finger up or you do woodwork. That was the other one. There was a guy that did woodwork that was testing out biometrics, and he could never get it to work because he didn't really have fingerprints anymore. But I think that definitely AI elements coming into PAM and just general user monitoring as well. You know, are they digging into areas that they shouldn't be?
Yeah.
Why is that account going into the sales areas? Again, we got that technology, but it requires us to get alerts and to review the alerts. And you know, in a day and age where we're getting assaulted from all angles with various different aspects, I mean, it gets bad. And of course, we've got the compliance element as well. All compliance now is gearing itself towards kind of fix the identity management thing, fix the authentication thing.
Yeah.
And it's getting really complicated to keep up, I'll be honest.
Yeah, and I think I was when David was talking about the point of trying to fix what fixed now versus kind of look at the bigger picture, or just putting kind of almost like a Band-Aid solution. And that's where, you know, you said that, like, I was going to bring up compliance, and that's another whole topic. But I think compliance in what I have seen is very much treated as a checklist thing, right? Okay, I need to get this thing done and check that off, versus thinking of it as more of a enterprise strategy of how do I do this to fix the broader issue. I think just if you just to get that checklist done, okay, we're done with this issue, and now we'll deal with it next time when it comes for me to prove this again.
Yeah.
But for now, this is what I'm doing. So I think part of that plays into this as well is the compliance aspect.
I mean, you make a really good point with the compliance thing. I mean, I'm a QSA. I'm a PCI DSS QSA. I have been for yonks now. And I'm ISO 27. I'm not just chucking out credentials there to look cool, just to set this particular scene. So I'm kind of used to the compliance element. And one of the frustrating things, and you did mention it actually, with compliance is it is viewed as a box ticker. And it's not. Compliance is there because nobody was bloody doing it before, so somebody had to enforce some kind of requirements on people to do it. If organizations, both public and private, actually looked at security properly and did security to a reasonable level, you wouldn't need compliance that is seen as tick box. What you would, and I've wanted compliance to be security professionals who've been validated to be good at what they do, to be able to go in and make a judgment call on what they're seeing, especially with some of this new technology coming out. Because the other problem with compliance is it doesn't update very quickly at all. They like to think it does. Obviously, the PCI Council update the fastest I've ever seen. Please don't take away my certification. I've just got to slip that in. But we are kind of on the cusp of a really new world of technology where, everything's being driven by AI, zero trust and so on and so forth. And I don't feel that compliance has really caught up in a lot of cases. And two aspects. One, they should set the standard level of security that organizations should meet, but it should be more like ISO, which is a little bit better at it, where it kind of gives you, it doesn't tell you how to do it so you can tick that box. Oh, I've got a 953 character password. Let's tick that. But I write it on a note and stick it to the monitor because I can't remember a 953 character password. I want people to look at, I want compliance to say you must have an effective method of identity management and authentication rights. Here are some examples. Have some examples, that's fine. But us auditors should be able to go in and say, right, so you're using biometrics and AI signature-based sort of like monitoring along with, AI elements of PAM. Perfect for me. I can write up my findings there rather than, do you have this set? Yes. Do you have this password times, the amount of how often you change it set to the right level? Yes. Because it doesn't work for all environments. And that's what I get really stressed out about with compliance, especially around the identity management and authentication and user rights aspects, because we do have users now who have to do all kinds of things that they may not necessarily have access to be able to do straight away, and it is cumbersome to put in a request that can take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to process. I'm not saying if you have an outsourced support thing halfway across the world from where you actually are that's the case, but I'll be honest, it is the case. So I think we've still got that challenge. We've got the compliance challenge, we've got the human challenge, because obviously people have got to accept it, whatever we put in. And then we've got to kind of keep it modern so that both insider threats and malicious actors on the outside can equally not take advantage. Because, I'm sure you guys have read, access brokers are well up for disgruntled admins and what have you before they leave to sell them access to a particular environment, be it with a made for account or a compromised account. And I don't see it going away anytime soon. We've got a fight with our own users. We have a fight with the guys on the outside trying to break in. And then we have a fight with our compliance people and even our own management who are like, well, give me elevated access because I am the most important individual on the C-suite and I demand access. And you're like, well, risk-based. And they just go, well, I'll accept that risk.
That's it. I like it. You mentioned there about the threat. I saw something earlier today where it was a signal channel where lapses are advertising for employment and saying, look, if you're interested in selling us access to a company you work with or a company you're leaving, get in touch. We're interested. Exactly to your point, right? It ties into that. And look, I completely echo on the compliance thing as well. I think it should be much more, I should say, here's the objective you need to achieve, as opposed to this is what you need to do. Because take credential management. It's always been historically rotate them very, very frequently, right? 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever the policy is. And that appears, right, in some kind of mandates. And then on the other hand, you've got the NCSC rightly saying, you know what, changing passwords every 30 days for your employees probably isn't your best line of defense. And so now we got, well, I should be changing my passwords, but then I'm told it's maybe not the best thing to do. And then people bring that together and they say, well, actually, you know what? We're not going to regularly rotate our admin passwords either because they said you don't need to change passwords. And whoa, context, people, this context. For day-to-day workforce, it's passwordless, it's MFA. For those built-in accounts that, aren't assigned to anyone, then you absolutely need to be rotating those, etc. But what's this all to do with? The objective is to stop lateral movement, privilege escalation, compromise of critical systems. As long as you can evidence that you're doing the right things for your industry, for your organization, that's where we should be heading, rather than getting stuck into, I can tick a box that every access now has got MFA somewhere. What have you, materially achieved, depending on your business and your organization? Rant over.
I wouldn't disagree with that, Rant. I'll be honest. I hate it when people say, but we've ticked that box. Look at the intent behind the requirement. Have a decent authorization, a decent identity management. It could be anything. But then a lot of us auditors fall into the problem. Well, how do I tick off this box? I have to tick off this requirement, but the customer is using some very unique or very modern way of doing it. They've done away with passwords. They're now in 2 other factors. Well, what do I put in? Because I know that my audit at some point is going to get reviewed by somebody who's probably not as technical as I am, because I understand what these guys are doing. And then I'll get penalized for it. So you end up being forced into a corner.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's, if we start, man, the problem is, and you mentioned before, technology changes so quickly that it becomes, I think, difficult to kind of say you should be doing these things at a low level technical. It should be, again, what's the objective? What are we trying to achieve? Evidence what you've done to achieve that objective, because technology changes so very, very quickly. And also, as you mentioned, right, compliance struggles to keep up. And then the way that I kind of look at compliance, and look, Jim, you may disagree, being a QSA, right, is I kind of see, I remember doing a speed awareness course. I may have been speeding once, right? And they said on the speed awareness course, I was in a rush, just the one time. It was I did 34 and a 30. And they said, when you see a road sign right on the road, that costs the council and the highway agency money, right? They only typically put them in when accidents have started to happen, when things have started to go wrong. And I kind of see compliance the same. It almost like we have to wait till things start to go wrong for then, some new regulation to come out and respond to that. So it's always maybe kind of one step behind tech sometimes. So if it's too technology prescriptive, by the time, mid-sized organizations have started to implement it, technology's raced ahead and we're doing something different. So it's got to be steered by what is that objective and what's relevant to the business in correlation to our objective.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have to approach this again at some point down the line, because I think we're on such a big cusp of change in technology. I can't tell what's coming in 2 to 3 years. I mean, you asked me 10 years ago what I could foresee, and I could give you a pretty good view, or I'd like to think I could give you a pretty good view, but I have no idea anymore. And I think that this is going to be an ongoing concern for organizations and the public as well. Let's be honest. a lot of our lives now are based in the digital world. You know, cryptocurrency. I'm going to do it. You know, digital validation. And, you know, I mean, to be fair, though, I mean, why do we still have a passport? Why do we still have a paper passport? I travel so often, the whole front of my passport has rubbed off the whole, you know, British passport kind of thing. It's still kind of there. And the corners are all buggered where they've been in my pocket and I've been in a rush and all the rest of it. So in one format, I do kind of support the fact that maybe we should replace some of our validation in our private lives with something a little bit more robust than a piece of card. Because let's face it, the cheap passports we have in the UK at the moment, I don't see mine lasting the 10 years that it's got written in it before I have to replace it at this rate. But it adds a whole host of other problems, and they're all based around what we've discussed and what we're looking at the moment. And I think this is going to be increasingly an interesting space to work in. And I think this is something that CISOs and security professionals out there need to kind of keep a close eye on and try to keep as up to date as possible. Because this is one of the biggest areas of technical security, as well as user acceptance, that you need to get right. Because if you don't get it right, not only are you going to end up being very insecure because you haven't put enough security in, or overly secure and people aren't going to be able to do their jobs, but on either side of the fence, you're going to get people who are going to be mightily pissed off. The users, because they can't log in and do what they want to do when they want to do it in the way that they want to do it, and then the bosses who are going to be pissed off because they have a breach because the security bar was set too low. Final thoughts before we lead out?
I think that the technology is there. I think the mindset needs to be maybe changed a little bit. Or I'm in the US and I am a big American football fan. There's this term called audible ready. And it's basically when the quarterback, they are running a play, but then he sees something different when he lines up at the line of scrimmage, and then he changes the play. That same concept I feel applies here, is you have to be ready. One, from a mindset perspective, that there is technology out there that can help in making things easier, better, faster. But you have to be able to embrace it and change and be open to change, because again, we're humans and change is not very easy.
We fear change.
I know you were talking about passwords and I was like, okay, that's another conversation. But I'll say technology is there. We just have to be open to change and be able to embrace it and use it to our advantage.
Yeah. And you say open to, you say people hate change. IT people absolutely hate change. But also I think being realistic, right? So there's a real identity challenge in that we've got such a broad range of systems. If you think about, I look at it from an organization standpoint, really broad. So I think it's trying to strike that balance, which is easier said than done, because the realism I was talking about is, I often hear in security, we want frictionless security. And let's be realistic, in the identity space and authentication space, there's no such thing as frictionless. Because if it's frictionless, we just say, well, you can access anything that you want with no password, right? Go crazy. That's frictionless. There's got to be some element of friction, right? It's like you've got to go through turnstiles to get into your office building. No one really begrudges them. Everyone understands that security. It's striking that right balance. It's ensuring that, the security is there. People understand why the security is there, but we're not making them go through 10 authentications before they access something. Because ultimately, if it's too painful to do, people will either not do it or they'll find ways and means to go around it. And I think that's one of the big challenges for organizations these days, is as they look across on-prem systems and cloud systems and third parties, is how to do that in a kind of consolidated, universal way. Exactly to your point, the technology is there. We have to embrace that change and just be realistic that frictionless isn't achievable, but something that's balanced between what the users expect and what security needs to deliver is achievable.
There you go. So as my guests say, quite adequately and quite appropriately, it's the users that are the problem, not the technology. I joke, I jest. Okay, so obviously we have to appease the marketing parts of our businesses. So, do you guys just kind of want to let the audience out there know where they can find you, and the organisations that you respectively work for, if they want to hit this bugbear of theirs called identity authentication and user management?
Yeah, absolutely. So nice, straightforward. Look, I think LinkedIn's always a great way. If you want to ask, feel free to message me on LinkedIn, reach out on LinkedIn, not a problem. Of course, really straightforward, www.cyberark.com, where a lot of what I've talked about, you can see how we're approaching that from a technology standpoint, is a great place to start.
Yeah, ditto. Same thing. LinkedIn is the best way to connect, and OneSpan.com for anything that we talked about as well. So from an authentication perspective, definitely can help.
Yeah. Sorry, I went old school there by saying www. I could have exactly just said cyberark.com.
Showing your age.
I know.
I thought you were going to spell out the name, the company name too.
I've let myself down at the end.
But no, it's been absolutely fantastic, and thank you all out there for the wonderful feedback that we do get. I get a lot of DMs. A lot of you are very frightened about putting posts in underneath the videos. I do get that. The security community is kind of a funny one at times, but please, it really helps us when you click the like button. And if you're one of the sort of like 80% of people who watch our videos that aren't subscribed, please, consider clicking that subscribe button. It really helps us with the algorithm. It really helps us with being found and spreading the message of what good security looks like. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, maybe you want us to come back and talk about a specific aspect that is a bugbear within your industry, or something that you see as a bit of a problem within the identity problem, the authentication, or anything like that, I will go out and rope both of my guests today, drag them back into the virtual studio, and we will address those concerns or those questions that you have. It's always good to get feedback as well. But thank you ever so much. We'll be seeing you again soon. Look after yourselves. Goodbye.